Predictive Advisors. I'm joined by my partner, Jason Morris. We're going to spend today talking about a couple fact or fiction topics that have been racing their way through the screening industry in the last 6 to 12 months. Jason, happy to dive in today?
I'm looking forward to diving in. I'm looking around my desk to see what book I'm reading right now, so we can talk about that for a second, but I can't seem to find any of my books here. Oh, actually, no, I got one. I'm reading What This Comedian Said Will Shock You by Bill Maher.
Yeah.
Bill, I am now a big fan of his. I love his perspective on things.
I'm finishing up a book, and I don't have it in the office right now, but it's by Will Harris. And he's a farmer who's really embraced regenerative farming, basically looking at the industrial meat complex and trying to take his sixth generation family farm, back to how humans have farmed for thousands and thousands of years. It was an interesting book to me because I like the idea, but as I go through it, I see so many concepts for just business, life. Those of you know, I spent a lot of time coaching, talking about my travel baseball team, just really reducing things to simplicity, focusing on great processes and outcomes. So that's one that I recommend people dive into as well. So, all right, you want to get started for what the main show people came here to hear us talk about?
Absolutely. Is there any other background screening like news that has happened in the last week that we were not thinking about or should be talking about, or anybody standing out and something they did really a good job with over the last couple of weeks?
No, I think we're kind of at the tail end right now of the post PBSA follow up and chatter. I know I've posted on the podcast in the last couple days our PBSA recap. We posted a product spotlight that we did with Latin America backgrounds, and I know that they got a ton of traction and booth visitors at the show. But no, I think everybody's kind of settling in for a good burst to the fourth quarter and looking to end the year. I do know it is Equifax letter time around the Work Number. People are starting to or will be getting their notifications soon about their 2025 rates, which always causes a bit of a dust up in the space. So I imagine we'll be hearing and talking about a lot more of that in the next couple weeks.
Great. Let's start out with the economy because I got CNN playing right here, and they're giving the jobs reports from Friday. And what do you think?
So I think that we are in a risk averse industry, and those of us who've done this for 25 years, like we have seen great economic times, slow economic times, and everything in between. I think probably because of the nature of the business and who many of us are as operators and entrepreneurs, we tend to be a little glass half empty on economic activity. We tend to worry a bit about interest rates and job cuts and unemployment. And I think most of the time those fears are unfounded. I think we worry too much about what might happen and not enough about what's currently happening and how businesses can just build themselves into better, stronger, faster. So if we think of fact or fiction as the economy slowing down, I don't see it. I know some businesses aren't reporting great numbers, but I think that's often a reflection of them. And I don't say it in a punitive way, but there's macro and microeconomic factors, and I'm not super bearish on the economy. What about you?
I'm pretty bullish on it, actually. I think we've pretty much avoided a recession here. What I question is, you see these great job numbers come out, but background screeners aren't doing as many background checks as they did before. Now, where are those jobs coming from? Maybe they're heavy in retail and not so heavy in some of the sectors that they're tracking. I don't know how those numbers are even tracked. But it's great to see. I think it gives consumers confidence and it gives the market confidence. I'm just not seeing it with the actual background checks being conducted. Maybe some of our viewers are, and I'm completely off on that. I'd love to get some feedback from our listeners on what they're seeing out there. But so far, I'm seeing declines. Now, last week, Target announced that they're hiring 100,000 seasonal workers before the end of the year, and Amazon's hiring 250,000. So that's great. I wonder if those type numbers like that, seasonal numbers, are included in those job predictions.
So that's a really good point, right? Because I would say, and something we talk about offline, is the general consensus is um, single digit, mid-single digit declines in revenue, orders, etc. For 2025, or excuse me, for 2024. And I guess where I come from on, hey, are we bullish or bearish on the economy is, you know, I think it's a tail that wags a dog. I think if we see a bad jobs report or interest rate hike or whatever, we're like, oh man, like we can't do the things to strengthen our business. Like we can't make that new hire. We can't do that marketing campaign. We can't hire that salesperson because the economy might go into a ditch. So I hear what you're saying a lot. And I guess I think of it as like, okay, what does that mean for you? Target's a great example. And that's awesome for the CRA that has Target. And that's great for, a secondary or tertiary benefit, and it rolls downhill. But like, just run your business, just do the best you can, and ignore the noise, ignore CNN. Look at the JOLTS report, but like, ignore the headlines.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm actually thinking about the methodology behind it. So, let's use a round number of 1,000. You're XYZ company, and you hired 1,000 new positions this year. That's awesome. But 2 years ago, you laid off 3,000 people. Have you filled those 3,000 jobs before adding 1,000 jobs, or have you already done that over time, and now you're just completely adding 1,000 new jobs? So I'd like to know more about the methodology
Yeah,
behind it than anything else.
yeah, it's a really good point, and I'm still struck by your comment. I've just been thinking about it for the last 3 minutes around volumes because yeah, you can't take the aspirational glass half full vision that I'm projecting without like we got to be honest with ourselves. We got to be honest with data. And you make a good point. Yeah, you hired 1,000 this year. You laid off 2,000 2 years ago. So my general attitude around that is kind of so what?
Right.
Okay, well go find a chief risk officer to sell monitoring to, or go find someone else to sell a new solution to that might not be talent acquisition. Yeah, there might be bad economic things happening, but can we look ourselves in the mirror and say, man, we are exploring every opportunity and trying to open every door for our products and services? And for a long time, I felt no. So that's where I come from when I'm like, hey, slowing economy, who cares? Because there's still enough people who want and need our stuff. Go talk to them.
Yeah. No, I agree with
So,
that.
okay. All right. Next topic, verifications, right? Mentioned a few minutes ago at the top. Third party increases are a coming, and they have for the last 4 to 5 years. So kind of our fact or fiction question is, and Jason, I'll let you go first. Are price increases killing the market for the product?
Short answer is yes. I mean, every CRA, especially the sizable ones I've talked to, are selling less verifications. The explanation to a client when they get their invoice that, hey, look, these are third-party fees, has nothing to do with us, we're just charging you, like only goes to a certain point. The total of the bill is still rising. And I think a lot of the larger CRAs have gotten a lot of pushback from their client base and are selling less of verification services.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We've talked to a couple reps at large, meaning 500 million and above companies who say, hey, in my book of business, companies are just abandoning it. They're just dropping it. Maybe they're doing something else. Maybe they're taking advantage of a Truve or an Argyle or something. Maybe they're just like, hey, I really don't care about that 6 months of history from Taco Bell 6 years ago. It just isn't relevant for me. I think the total dollars spent on verification, the product as a percentage of the total market is not changing, right? You can have declining volumes raising prices, and that still, lands you here. But I agree with that. I think fewer people want verifications now, and that makes me sad from a risk management standpoint. I think it opens up a door that for a long time was pretty closed when it comes to risk. And
Yeah, I agree. And I've tried to make this argument case for the last couple of years where I think the quantitative parts of the background check, the criminal records, the things that are fact based, um, you know, are going to become less and less important as there's more people working from home and the risk tolerance is higher to really care if somebody has a 5-year-old theft. when they're working from home or whatever the case might be. I think the tolerance has widened, um, and the reputational concerns that companies have about their reputation and the employees that can add negatively to that, the tolerance has decreased. Companies are looking for the person that said something anti-Semitic on Facebook or whatever it might be. I think hampering our ability to do verifications hampers our ability to find negative things in somebody's reputation. Um, I
I'm sorry,
think
go ahead.
there's an inflection point here where, yes, traditional verifications like we've always known them will decline, but there will be other new ways or other ways or older products like reference checks to still verify that somebody is a good person.
Yeah, and I don't think, unless a third party fee, and this happens, unless the increase in third party fee makes an end user go back to their provider and their CRA and say, hey, listen, I got to pay these rising third party fees. My budget is still my budget. Now I got to cut elsewhere. Like that is the avalanche. That's the cascading impact where it's like, okay, well, I got to pay the fee here. So now I'm going to kill federals or now I'm going to kill an MVR. Like that's where the risk multiplies. So I think, we're both fact on this. The segue I want to make to your question, Jason, because another topic we have is like, hey, is this a commodity business? Right? And you and I have argued about this for 20 years. But I think both of us are kind of on the same page that really progressive, forward thinking companies, yes, this is a risk management tool, but it's also a predictive tool. And what you said, Jason, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, we're having some really interesting conversations where people are saying, like, I need this product to help me make predictions. I'm not going to bang somebody out because they stole a stop sign 3 years ago. I need to know if they're going to do the same thing tomorrow. We're having some really cool conversations about that. You want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's again, especially with AI, we'll get into AI a little bit later, but there's some new thoughts on ways to approach new products to do just that, predictive analysis. And it's like, remember, there's a Minority Report with Tom Cruise to talk about future crimes that you might commit. I think that predictive thing is going to be a part of the future of background screening. I don't know how it's going to fit in, but there's going to be some sort of elements of that at some point. Um, One thing I
I
wanted to talk about also with verifications, I'll take a step back because I
Yeah.
want to get to say it about the rise in prices. One thing that really scares me there is, and I know for the last couple of years this wasn't the case, but I've heard rumblings that this could end up changing. Everybody's paying the same price, whether you're a client of one of the top five all the way down to the bottom few. The prices are pretty much within the margins that Equifax is charging. But I now understand, and I could be wrong, that they're going to take in considerations the economies of scales, and the companies that do the most volume are going to get price breaks. That could be very anti-competitive. That could be
Well,
that could have a really chilling effect on the rest of the industry.
I,
If
I
it
know
happens.
something. I know something that we're getting a lot of questions on is, it's the top of the waterfall concept. It's one price if you just want to do your thing and hit me when you need me. It's another price if you start with me.
Mhm.
Um, and then CRAs have to make that decision. We've had to make those decisions in the past. So, that idea is certainly very much on the radar of a number of organizations.
So let's go back to what you were talking about before with the the predictive stuff. What do you think there? I mean, what have you seen? What do you think?
I had a really, really impactful conversation with a screening program manager who spends millions of dollars and knows everything about our industry, basically because that's her world. But she works with a, front page of the Wall Street Journal kind of organization and is really kind of challenging her team and herself and us and her partners on this concept of like, essentially, you're right. Managing risk and knowing about somebody's past, that's one thing. And I know 20 years ago we all thought, personality testing would really kind of disrupt our space, and that didn't come to fruition. But Those are the roots of kind of the same conversations we're having now. Yes, I want to know if there is something in someone's past that will preclude them from working with our organization, but I also need to know quality of hire, length of tenure. We're going to be filling the same position in 5 months. Really optimizing their ability to capture and then predict what future performance is going to look like for someone within the industry. And that from that organization, that's what they're thinking most about. So pulling that into like the commodity, not commodity conversation, um, you know, data's coming from the same courthouse, or the back end social trace provider is the same as your competitor's back end social trace provider. So yeah, those things I think we can have reasonable arguments on. Is that a commodity? Is a social trace a commodity product? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, depending on who the data provider is. But just the idea that we're hearing more from end users around, I need to predict better. That is something I think deserves more attention in our industry than it's getting right now.
I think it's easier to predict with people that have had things in their past that are negative and then haven't had anything in their past that are negative over the last, 5 or 10 years versus people that have been pretty clean, maybe had 3 or 4 jobs in their history and no criminal records, no negative things on their background. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen with them. I remember a project that Tammy Henry was working on when she was running the program over at Walmart, where they wanted to take, the thousands of people they gave a chance to, the thousands of people that had a theft on their record that was 5 years old, and then using that from 5 years ago and saying, have they, has there been any recidivism, or they've been a great employee, over the last 5 years, they've killed it because they did have that on their record. They wanted to prove themselves. So I think that kind of predictive stuff is easier to do than just predicting off of, kind of a blank slate.
Yeah. And there are a lot of, right, you mentioned that, and I certainly remember that. A lot of low-tech analog ways to measure that and to be of value for your company. You might not have a predictive analytics solution that you can roll out to your next sales lead that asks about it, but there's a number of things you can do to stand in the middle and use the data that you have at your disposal or that of your history with a client to help them on that. You have the data. They read the report or saw the adjudication status and they moved on and they made a hiring decision. But you're the one who knows that. And, there's a relationship there. There's a project there. There is value there. That's a sellable service. So, my first comment around predictive stuff, you'd be like, hey, well, I don't have any of that. I don't know how to do that. You're right. But there's also other things, like it's not just, you can't do anything to help. Just look for opportunities to help.
Yep.
And that gets us away from the, hey, I won this bid or lost this bid because my MVR price was 20 cents cheaper. That kind of behavior is just, that'll ultimately strangle us as
Yep.
an industry. If we can't carve out a way to get an extra 20 cents and like celebrate it and stand on it, like that's a hard position to compete within.
Yep.
You got a lot of AI thoughts.
Yeah.
Why don't we go there next?
It's funny because it's one of the questions that, I talk to lots of bankers and lots of private equity guys that are either investing in or have invested in the industry. And AI is always the first question. Like, what is the impact that AI is going to have on this industry? And I think there's a lot of unknowns because, again, I think that, with the good portion of the background screening companies, they're not as sophisticated as some of the other industries that you might be, used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis as just a consumer. So it's really hard to say how people are going to apply it, but we're seeing it already in a few different places. We're seeing it in places where we have lots of labor that can decrease the labor need for some of those services. For instance, we get back sometimes, 30, 40 pages on a criminal report. Sometimes it could be hundreds of pages on a criminal report. And it used to be that you kind of go through there with a highlighter, you look for what you need and what you're going to report and put into the system. Well, AI allows, the systems to do all that. It can normalize all that data. It can clean it up, and then it can spit it out and regurgitate it in an instant almost. Whereas that would take several people to do before. There's some talk of using chatbots to replace customer service, but chatbots, not like you've seen them in the past. Chatbots are you're looking at your account and looking at the averages and the turnaround times, and you can ask it, really pointed questions and get really detailed, correct responses based on the data that it's analyzing. So I think there you're going to have a lot of opportunity as well. They'll plug AI into different parts of the process just to speed up the process, how verifications work, or how things are routed through the workflows, or how records are dispatched. I think AI will have big advantages there. What I don't see happening right away or anytime soon is using AI to put out a product, or using AI to predict somebody's propensity to, act violently in the workplace. Like, I just don't think you're going to see that. I think there's a lot of, legal barriers to stuff like that, but you're just not going to see that because the industry isn't that sophisticated yet. So I think from an operational standpoint and a workflow standpoint, that's where it's going to have the largest impact.
Do you think, Jason, there's a universal understanding of AI?
No.
What it is and what it isn't? Yeah, I totally agree.
No, I don't think most people really understand it or really can grasp it. They know they've used it to write articles or help them write an email or whatever it is, and it's great for that stuff. But the true, overall impact of what it can be in the future, especially in this industry, are pretty profound. I'd really like to hear back from some of our listeners too, to see what they think or where they can apply these types of things into their offerings.
Yeah, because one person's AI definition is another person's automation definition, right? The example Jason just gave of the 30 pages, to filter out, like, we've all been there. Somebody may say, yeah, my data provider does that, and they got settings, and I turn the dials, and I make check boxes, and they just spit out to me the answer to that. Well, is that AI? Is that automation? Is that machine learning? And, sometimes the answer is yes to all of it. Sometimes it's no to all of it. So some of those things, like that example of, hey, I got 30 pages of raw data behind the scenes, but all I see are the 3 possible matches. That's been happening for over a decade. Yeah, so I think your comment is a really good one, Jason, especially coming off our thoughts on recidivism, predictability, etc. Like, are we giving a predictive score? And I certainly don't see CRAs wanting to play in that sandbox.
POCs don't like it, and they're already kind of cracking down on the way that AI is used to screen resumes and stuff like that. So I think everybody's going to kind of be careful with how they apply it.
You know what I am seeing, and I'm seeing some innovative marketing and branding, and I think it's higher right. And I got to look it up after we turn off the recording. We're going to have to fix it in post if I'm wrong, but I think it was higher right that is essentially branded their workflow verification process. Right. We talk about, a few minutes ago, we talked about top of the funnel, top of the waterfall with Equifax, et cetera. Well, higher right has kind of branded that process of saying, oh, we're using computers and technology to say this one goes manual, this one goes to Equifax, this one goes to a different partner, et cetera. There's at both points that's innovative and it's not innovative. And I think that the part of me that says it's not innovative, but what I really love is, like, man, they just turned that into a brand. They turned that into a product. They turned that into a feature. And other CRAs were like, well, I do that too. Well, guess what? They're the first ones out there talking about it and branding it, and marketing it, and others selling it. So you can do it, but if nobody knows you can do it, nobody knows you can do it.
Right.
They're out there saying, man, look at what we can do. It's the exact same thing as yours, but they're talking about it. You're not.
Yep.
I think that's like, so to your comments around, hey, how's AI you? Sometimes the best benefit is just how it's communicated.
Yeah,
that is the opening and the opportunity.
I mean, look, when we were 10 years ago when we sold the business, we were at Sterling. I remember talking to Claire Hart about all the machine learning and AI stuff they were doing. That was 10 years ago. And they were basically feeding these engines with large amounts of information one time. You had to learn, how to revise code and the California revised code and the Illinois revised code like one time. And now everything that kind of goes through that engine knows exactly how to decipher it. So, there are companies that are leading the way on it. There's companies that are kind of a little bit behind. But
And that, to the ultimate fact or fiction we need to determine here, is size of the market and size of the market. What does that mean? Well, you have the size of the market, more than half of which is controlled by half a dozen companies.
yeah,
Then you have 98% of CRAs that control the other. Like, which one is the fact? Which one is the fiction? So for most of the market, if we're thinking it in terms of number of CRAs, this is fiction. For half dozen companies, this is fact.
yeah,
That's kind of a cool way to think about it.
yeah,
Last topic we have to talk through, speed, right? Time to hire, time to hire, time to hire. 6 month, 6 week, whatever hiring process. But man, if that background check is done in 9 hours instead of 8 hours, we lost the candidate. At what point is speed, like at what point does it matter and what point is like fast enough, fast enough?
yeah. I think there's a threshold. I think that, and I'll stick by this to the day I die. But still 90% of the market doesn't care. They want something fast, they want something easy, and they want something inexpensive. If it's good enough, it's good enough. And I think that what we're talking about here, if the speed is within the margins, it's good enough, and people aren't going to care. Now, they're always going to remember the one background check that took a week, and not the 800 background checks they got back in 8 hours. So I think a lot of that's just staying on top of that with the clients and educating them into a point where they really understand what the delays truly are.
Where we have a lot of success, not only inside of CRA, but in working with our client now, is telling that story that Jason just mentioned, right? It is the hiring manager, it is the executive VP of talent acquisition, it's the chief operating officer that, to Jason's point, they hear about the one. They don't hear about the 1,000. So what we've always had success with and help our clients with now is telling the story of, listen, 900 were done in 24 hours. 600 were done in 10 hours. 400 were done in 4 hours. Sorry, John Smith took a week. So that's a great segue into our next topic, speed and turnaround time, right? The narrative inside the industry within clients is faster, faster, faster. At what point is fast enough good enough, Jason, in your model?
Again, I just think there's a threshold. It's really giving your clients the data that they need to understand what those turnaround time volumes are. I said it earlier. Well, we pre-recorded this. That they don't think about the 850 background checks that came back, inside of one day. They think about the one that took 2 weeks. There's good reason for why the one took 2 weeks. Are the CRAs doing a good enough job in educating their clients to those points and explaining that to their clients? And one of the ways to do that is doing quarterly business reviews and making sure that they understand exactly the data points for the past quarter. How many background checks were done within a day? How many background checks are done through automation? It's incumbent upon the CRA to bring those data points back to their clients.
Yeah, what we've had a lot of success for as owners and now working with our CRA partners is, like Jason said, what is the story we're telling, right? Because it is that one. Like, on one hand, we're like, man, well, 999 of them were done in this time frame, but one didn't. Now you're gonna crucify me over that? Well, yeah, because that's the one that gets the attention of the hiring manager and the head of HR and the COO, and that stinks, and it's really unfair for us. So I think a lot about the stories that we tell. Hey, you got 999 that were done inside of 36 hours. You got 500 that were done inside of 12 hours. You got 300 that were done inside of 4 hours, right? It's the story. But not only does that story provide a greater level of protection around just that safety of the account, right? There's financial implications as well, because if you're a CRA out there that's thinking, well, man, I got to get my turnaround time from 12 hours to 10 hours. Well, I got to hire 9 more people to do that. Or it doesn't necessarily need to be that complicated. I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you got to hire 9 more people to get from 24 hours down to 12. But like that last incremental gain, it doesn't have to result in a financial expenditure. Sometimes it's just rethinking that client communication strategy. What are you telling, and how are you not only getting that information to your day-to-day contact, but how are you getting that to the head of HR, who also has to deal with the complaint from the hiring manager about that one that took 2 weeks? That's where you win the battle. You win it right there at that person's desk. So I think that does it for us. Why don't you take us home, Jason?
Well, thanks everybody for joining our podcast. And again, it's something we're going to try to do a lot more of. iCube Advisors is here for all of your recruiting needs, your M&A advisory needs, your consulting, expert witness work. Check out our new website at iCubeadvisors.com. And we look forward to seeing you guys on our next podcast.
Thanks, everyone.